I'm going to, oh, I'm sorry, sorry. I need to go into my settings and fix that because it's making me, every time I record something, it makes me echo. But we don't have a whole lot to cover in section B of chapter 9. So I've skipped all the way down here to slide number 5. Just to remind you that what happens in a muscle contraction involves a motor neuron that either originates from the spinal cord or the brain. And that neuron, the part of the neuron that sends the signal to the muscle fiber, is called the axon. And the part that touches or comes in close contact with the muscle fiber is called the axon terminal. Where the axon terminal contacts the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction. And we noticed that there were many axons connected to. There were sometimes one axon connected to many muscle fibers. As you can see here, here's motor unit 1, which is connected in 2 places to a muscle fiber. It's connected to 2 separate muscle fibers. And then motor unit 2 is connected to 1, 2, 3 separate muscle fibers. When we look at the neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates, we call that a motor unit. And the motor unit can be small and it can be large. There can be thousands of muscle fibers for each neuron. And in that case, you would have a muscle like maybe the quadriceps or the biceps. Large muscles of the arms and legs will have large motor units. They don't have really fine movements. But if you look at the eye, the muscles of the eye that cause it to look up and down and left and right, those muscles are going to be very small motor units. They're going to be one neuron with 2 or 3 muscle fibers. So very few number of fibers per neuron. And then a muscle twitch is just a simple contraction. It's the contraction that results from the first response, or from the response to a single action potential from the motor neuron. So it's like a quick contraction and then a relaxation. When twitches are added together, we call this summation. Temporal summation over time, means adding them together, one right after the other. And that can lead to, this is showing you temporal summation, adding twitches with a partial relaxation phase in between. But that can lead to a fusion of the, this is unfused, but whenever the twitches fuse, there is no relaxation period in between twitches. And so when that happens, we call it fused tetanus. This is complete tetanus or fused tetanus. I normally hear that the term complete tetanus is when the twitches add up and there's no relaxation between twitches. So I saw some questions about that. And then not a lot of questions about this, but there are questions about the where the ATP comes from that supplies the muscle. Okay, so we need ATP for the muscle fiber to have energy to move and also to detach cross bridges so that the muscle can relax. Energy is needed to pump calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum after a contraction, pump sodium out of and potassium back into the cell after excitation, contraction, coupling. So that's through the action of the sodium-potassium pump, and we know that requires ATP. So the available stores of ATP in a muscle are depleted in 4 to 6 seconds. And ATP is the only source of energy for contractile activities. There must be a way to regenerate ATP quickly. So there are 3 mechanisms for regenerating ATP, and one is by the use of creatine phosphate. It's creatine phosphate is a chemical that contains a phosphate, and that phosphate can be removed from creatine phosphate and added to ADP to produce ATP. Then there's the anaerobic pathway, glycolysis and lactic acid formation, and this occurs when the muscle is really reaching the point of fatigue. And the aerobic pathway, which occurs during when the muscle is resting. So when do we see creatine phosphate being used? Creatine phosphate is used to create ATP, to instantly form ATP. And you can see how that works. Here's the creatine phosphate, giving its phosphate to ADP, producing ATP. That uses the enzyme creatine kinase. And now you're just left with creatine, ATP and creatine, because the creatine no longer has its phosphate. And this takes about 15 seconds. Then we have the anaerobic pathway that can generate ATP, but not much. This only happens during low oxygen levels. So this is when the muscle is really tired and fatigued, has been exercising for a while. And the anaerobic processes are called glycolysis and lactic acid formation. What's going to happen is lactic acid is a byproduct, is going to diffuse into the bloodstream, and the liver is going to convert it back into pyruvic acid or glucose. Anaerobic respiration yields only 5% as much ATP as aerobic, but it does produce ATP faster. So we need anaerobic respiration during periods of fatigue. It says it takes 30 to 40 seconds to produce ATP this way. Anaerobic respiration occurs in muscle cells. It produces 95% of the ATP during rest and light to moderate exercise. So aerobic respiration is mainly used during rest and light exercise, whereas anaerobic respiration is going to be used in the muscle during high muscle activity. Now, as far as, let's see. Okay, I think that's good as far as making sure we cover what's in the exam, what's on the exam.